It's October here in Colorado and fall is in the air, but I'm thinking about ice fishing and I'm thinking about big lake trout. I had one of the best fishing experiences I've ever had. 2 days fishing with my friends, Granby Reservoir, big lake trout, and that was just this year in January. I've got 3 tips that will catch huge lake trout this winter. Stay tuned. Okay guys, so my first tip for catching monster lake trout, you can actually start right now. If you have a graph, a fish finder, a Garmin, a Humminbird, a Lowrance, if you have the capability to chart plot, essentially map your own contours of the lakes that you're fishing. If you have that ability with your fish finder, get out to your favorite lake that has lake trout and start mapping that lake in the fall. It's invaluable in the wintertime when you're looking for places to start drilling holes. So tip number 1, get out and start mapping your favorite lake today. Start doing that today, and come wintertime, you're gonna have some up-to-date contour maps of your favorite spots that you fished in the fall time, and you can target those same spots in the winter. The other thing about fish finders, when you're targeting big lake trout here in Colorado especially, a fish finder is going to be your best friend. You don't need the fanciest live scope. A lot of guys swear by the flasher. So if you're going to target big lake trout here in Colorado, I highly recommend a flasher or a graph. Now there's a big difference between a flasher and a graph in terms of the visualization of the fish. So those that are comfortable and familiar with a flasher, I hate to say it, but that's honestly your best bet here for fishing big lake trout. The accuracy of a flasher and the reaction time of the flasher are what set it apart just slightly from a graph. I've tried both. I'm not a flasher guy, to be honest, but having used it to catch lake trout especially, there's just a nuance to the bite that a flasher will help you gain the advantage. A graph, you have to train yourself to be able to use a graph to catch big lake trout. For me, that Garmin is still my preferred fish finder when I'm fishing for big lake trout. However, I have to know that it's going to have a slight delay. So my key tip here is don't rely so much on the graph. It's going to put you in the right position, and it's going to tell you that there's a fish in the area or that there's a fish coming towards your bait. But that's when your instincts need to take over. Don't stare at your screen. Don't get locked in on your screen. When you know that there's a fish in the area, that's when you start to watch your line. That's when you start to watch the tip of your rod. That's when you start to feel things and use your instincts. While it's recommended to have a flasher or a graph, you're still going to need to use your instincts to set the hook and catch, especially these monsters. All right? For those of you that prefer the graph to a flasher, like myself, I do have one tip for you. In your settings, you'll want to go in and adjust your scroll speed to ultra, to the maximum. That will give you kind of the maximum reaction time so that when you do see fish on the graph, you'll have the least amount of delay. So outside of that, remember the tip. Don't focus on the screen, focus on your line, focus on the pole, focus on the feel, focus on your instincts. You're a fisherman, catch the fish, get your eyes off the screen. All right, tip number 2. This is an important one. You have to use the right equipment. So when it comes to fishing for big lake trout, and we're talking big lake trout, we're talking master angler and up size lake trout, okay? You need to have the right rod and reel setup. This is my Jason Mitchell Mac rod my Jason Mitchell macrod. It's a 40HS. So it's 40 inches. I don't know if you can even see, it's pretty big. I probably would have went a little bit longer, but the ice rod cases that I had, this one barely fit. So I went with the 40 inch, but you're gonna need every inch of this. So I've also got a pretty beefy reel on here. It's actually the Shields. It's the Shields Outfitters Tournament Edition. Let's see if we can get that in there. So what's it called? This is the Tournament LT 2500 XH. So it's a 2500 series reel. The Shields Outfitters, this is actually a Daiwa reel with a Shields logo on it. So it's a pretty nice reel. The two key things here are, one, it's a 2500. When you're fishing for big lake trout, okay, you're potentially fishing in 100 feet of water. And these things can take massive runs. So you're going to want something that can hold a decent amount of line. So a 2500 series reel is probably, honestly, that's probably the lowest I would go for your trophy lake trout, okay? Second key thing for your reel is going to be the fact that I have, now I can't actually remember, I think I have 15-pound braid, but the point is it's braided line, okay? You need to have braided line on your Laker rod. That braided line, now if you're fishing in 10 feet of water, you can probably get away with, just a heavy mono or fluoro. I typically use fluoro when it comes to ice fishing. If I'm going to spool it with anything other than braid, it's fluorocarbon. For my lake trout rig especially, I'm going to be using a fluorocarbon backing with probably a, depending on how heavy of a setup you want, probably a 15 to 20 pound braid, and then a, depending on how heavy of a leader you want, a 15 to 10 pound fluorocarbon leader. Okay, I like Seagar Brazex. It's probably my favorite. It's probably my favorite all-around fluorocarbon line from Seagar. So those are two very important things. The reason that braid is so important, and we'll get to this in a second. Now, when you're jigging a tube jig off the bottom in 100 feet of water and you pull up on fluorocarbon or mono, it's going to have a long stretch. In 100 feet of water, that long stretch is going to cause the action of your tube jig to be slightly delayed. And so if you go to set the hook and you've got a big stretch in your line, you're potentially missing fish a lot, okay? So this gives you the precision that braided line takes the stretch out. And so when you go to set the hook, you're going to set the hook. And you can feel it, okay? So it's important that you have braid spooled on your line. You can have fluorocarbon leader, just like I have here, but the main part of your spool needs to be braid, okay? Now guys, I gotta say, these tips are coming directly from the guides that take folks out to catch these trophy lake trout here in Colorado, okay? So this is good information. I promise you this stuff's gonna catch you guys some monster lake trout. If you guys dig this content and you wanna see some ice fishing videos this winter, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because there's lots more to come. All right, getting to my final tip for catching monster lake trout. It's tip number 3, tube jigs, folks. Now this isn't anything special, but I'm going to tell you exactly how to fish this tube jig. When it comes to catching monster lake trout, the bigger the tube jig, the better. This is a level head jig, which is very important. You want to get that level head jig. So you see where that eyelet sits. It's not at the front of the tube jig. It's in the middle. So you get a level set, right? And even in the water, it sits almost horizontal. This is a Northland Tackle Company level head Predator tube jig. Okay, it's your typical tube jig setup. However, this one's actually got the stinger hook coming off the back, so you've got a steel leader with a treble hook, which is your stinger hook there coming off the back. So this stinger hook is perfect for a tiny piece of sucker meat. Okay, and that's honestly, if you're going to do anything, if you wanted to increase your chances, a little piece of sucker meat on the stinger hook there, that's all you need, okay? Outside of that, I'm going to explain to you how to use this tube jig to catch a big one. So if you remember earlier in the video, I told you to go out and start to graph your favorite lake. So when you found that spot, that one spot that you wanted to try, come back there in the wintertime. I would recommend finding a flat, okay? So a deep flat, something that we like to call a room with a view. A nice big flat that looks out over a steep drop-off. That's exactly what you're looking for, okay? So room with a view. That fish can sit up there and just kind of look out and survey his surroundings, all right? Now this could be anywhere from 20, 30, 50, this could be all the way up to 90 feet deep, okay? This same technique will work. What you're going to do is you're going to drop this tube jig all the way down to the bottom, and you're going to feel it. Now there's two things that can happen when you're dropping this tube jig down to the bottom. It might go all the way down, and you'll feel it when it hits. Hopefully you found a muddy bottom. That's the key here too. You don't want to be necessarily in the rocks if you can. If you can find a muddy bottom, that's the key here. So when this tube jig hits the bottom, it's going to suck into the mud and you'll feel it, okay? It's going to go down like this, and when you pull up, you'll be able to pull up so slightly, and it'll get stuck in the mud almost, where you have to go to a certain extent to get it out of the mud, and so it's just got that suction of the mud just enough. So that's where you want to be though, okay? That lake trout watched this tube jig go all the way down to the bottom, and when it hit the bottom and it's stuck here, he's coming over, okay? Where you want to be is tight on that line to where if you gave it just the slightest tug, it would pull out of the mud, okay? But you're feeling it, and because that's what you want. You want to have tension on that line, because if that lake trout comes over and he buries this thing in the mud and he pins it against the ground, you're going to feel the difference, okay? And you're going to set that hook. Or if he picks it up and takes off with it, you're going to feel the difference, and you're going to set that hook. But that's what you're looking for, and it's pretty subtle, okay? So you drop that thing down, and it's sitting on the mud, and you just have just enough tension that if anything changes, you set that hook and you set it hard, okay? This is a pretty decent hook set. So for you bass anglers out there, bring that energy, okay? So this is going to be a substantial hook set, because you'll miss more than you get them. It's subtle at times, all right? So the one other technique that I'll mention, as you have it sitting on the bottom, what you can do is lift it up and drop it down, and lift it up and drop it down. And what you're doing is you're pounding the bottom, okay? And you'll feel it. You'll really get the feel for the weight of this tube jig, and how much line you have out, what the one little tug will do. It'll bring it up, just a few inches off the bottom. And you're not jigging this thing 3 and 4 feet. You're jigging this thing 3 and 4 inches. So it's super subtle, okay? So just the slightest movement from the tip of your jig, from the tip of your rod, will give you the action that you need down below. Okay, so it's not huge movements. Now, some days you might need one or two of those big pops, but for the most part, we're acting real subtle down there. We're pounding the bottom. We're raising up some of that mud and that silt, and we're getting that lake trout's attention. And then you're going to let it sit there. So when you see that lake trout come in on your graft, you're going to let it sit there. All right? This is very specific, okay? I want you guys to listen carefully. You're going to let it sit there, and you're waiting with the tension on that line. And if he comes in, and again, you're not watching your graph anymore, you know he's coming. Now you're paying attention to the line, you're paying attention to the feel, to the tip, okay? That's where any subtle change and you set the hook. That's how you catch a big lake trout with a big tube jig. Now colors are important too. These big tube jigs, they make a lot of different colors. Chartreuse is a pretty decent color. I've had a lot of success with chartreuse. Everyone will tell you white tube jigs are the way to go, and I've had success with white as well. But for the monster lake trout, the master angler lake trout, the guys that have been caught 2 or 3 times before, and they're smart, those lake trout, they go more for the natural colors. Okay, so when it comes to fishing for the big lake trout, try and match your tube jig color to the natural forage. All right, so as an example, if those big lake trout are foraging on small rainbow trout, for example, a gray or purple color, like a gray sparkle or a purple color tube jig might be just the trick for that day. So I highly recommend a more natural color if you're going to go for the big ones. One last tip. Sometimes this technique, the bottom technique, call it, they won't take it off the bottom. And sometimes all they need is for you to take it from the bottom and just reel up. And when they start to chase it, then you know you got a chaser, okay? So just reel that thing straight off the bottom and let that thing follow you up. And this is where you can use the graph a little bit to play him. If you get to a certain point where you don't think he's going to chase you anymore, you drop it back down and you let it go all the way back down and hit the bottom again, and you cycle through that routine again, okay? Bottom, bring it up, let it drop, jig it, bring it up, let it drop, jig it, okay? I guarantee you guys, if you can find them and you can put this thing down there, you're going to have success. When you're fishing for big lake trout, don't be afraid to use a big bait. I really think that if you take these tips, you'll be able to go out and catch a master angler lake trout. And I can tell you from experience, it is a blast.